thank you all for being here at the Georgetown Club. And I thank the Georgetown Club and DC Cable and Georgetown Cupcake. And I especially thank our guest, Diane Foley, who is here to talk about her book, American Mother. We will be selling it right after, so buy all the copies, and then we'll let you back in again. No, but please, it's a wonderful. I don't know that wonderful is the right word, but it's an enriching and compelling book, and you'll be glad you read it, and then get a copy for a friend. I mean, I guess I want to start someplace else, but the headline is that you are the mother of a young freelance journalist who went to war, got captured, and brutally murdered, and became a national, global story for that reason. Because of his murderers, ISIS. His murderer, in many ways, put them on the map that year. But before that happened, you were Mrs. Foley, living in New Hampshire.
Yes.
You had a big family, 5 children, I believe.
Yes.
And among them was Jim, who clearly from a very early age charted his own course. And we're going to talk a lot about Jim. But one thing I've listened and read, and there's this I want to know a little bit more about you to begin. Where are you from? Where did you grow up? Are you from New Hampshire? How did you end up there? You're a nurse. How did you become a nurse?
Sure. I was born in New Hampshire. My dad is from New Hampshire. My mom's from Ecuador, however. So I grew up hearing Spanish and speaking in English, teaching her English. But I grew up very much in New Hampshire, went to the University of New Hampshire, and always loved languages, but was drawn to nursing early on. So I became a community health nurse and eventually a family nurse practitioner. And met my husband at school and had 5 children, and Jim was our oldest.
Yeah.
He was a very curious,
what an influence to
child.
have on the others, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Your husband, what kind of doctor?
Internist.
So busy.
Busy. Internal medicine. Yeah. And but John joined the Army Medical Corps shortly after we were married. So we did a lot of traveling early on. We primarily in the United States. But that's why Jim was born in Evanston, Illinois.
I noticed that.
Yeah.
But you traveled. You were aware of the world around us.
Somewhat, yeah.
Maybe felt somewhat protected from the evils of the world.
I think so,
in
many ways.
But, and you remember 9/11?
Oh, absolutely. I was a parish nurse at that time. I was working in a church community too, in addition to going to graduate school. And I remember it was during an exercise class. We saw the horror on TV. Absolutely. And
this was terror right in our faces.
Exactly.
That you thought, well, this might never touch me. I'm so happy it doesn't touch me. Or, this isn't in my life. I feel so sad for those people.
Well, it was pretty horrifying,
it was horrifying
because it was in our country.
It affected us, but, it's not at your doorstep. And you're probably thinking it never will be. Do you remember when you first ever learned of ISIS?
Yes, but to be honest, 9/11 did feel like it was at our doorstep. To me, as a nation, I think sometimes we think we are so protected. And when that happened, it did feel, it was very frightening to me at the time. But I didn't know much about ISIS, to be honest. I was quite ignorant about what was going on in Syria. And the Middle East, except for the good part in that they were so excited about seeking the freedoms we enjoy, that time of Arab Spring in 2011 when they were so hopeful that they might be free.
I imagine Jim brought it to the dinner table because of his travels and what he was covering.
To some extent, Jim tended to interview us when he came home. He tended to want to know how we were. So he didn't share a lot about what he was doing except for his passionate commitment to cover what was going on in the Middle East.
But you knew he was in war zones.
Yes.
And that perhaps made you pay more attention to what...
Yes. We had three younger siblings who were in the military. So they were all, it was kind of a scary time for our family.
Yeah. But, and then Jim goes to Libya and the unthinkable happens.
Yes.
He gets kidnapped.
Yes, exactly.
And you're, I mean, it's something that there's no guidebook, right?
No.
Because you didn't exist yet as a guide. You're a guide now, but there was no you then.
No, it was shocking. We just couldn't believe. I had been very ignorant about the risks that freelancers take. I had no idea. Jim had been embedded with the Army in Afghanistan and Iraq.
You have some protection.
Yes, to hone his skills, if you will. But when the Arab Spring started, he chose to go into Libya as a freelancer. Yeah, very different.
People don't know that freelance journalists have no, unless they hire their own security or their own fixers. They usually kind of organize in packs, groups of them, and. There's a lot of camaraderie and friendship and safety in that, but they don't have professional security.
Not at all. And they don't have much of a budget often.
No.
So they, have to do their best on their own.
Yeah, and they're also often in before and the last out of more conventional media who do have the protections.
Definitely, because war zones are obviously dangerous. So staff journalists, tend to go in and out quickly, whereas the freelancers tend to cover that void, if you will.
Yeah, it's a very brave way to go, and I imagine within your family, when he got kidnapped, there must have been many mixed feelings, like, why was Jim there? How did he let himself?
We were incredibly shocked, is what we were. We were shocked. And it was his next older brother who really went to bat for, and a lot of his friends. They put up a website and did all they could to find, and it ended up being a citizen, a good man from Washington, D.C., actually, David Bradley, working with Teach for America, friends of Jim that did the research to figure out ways to get into Gaddafi's son for his release. It was quite amazing.
Yeah, that is, David Bradley, I think I'm not surprised.
No, but he was a treasure, but a total stranger who stepped up because he also had a freelancer, Claire Gillis, who was taken at the same time.
But this episode didn't make a lot of noise, did it? It wasn't a big news story that they'd been kidnapped.
No.
And did you involve the government at all, or did you do it totally privately?
The government, Consular Affairs was in touch with me and told me Jim was kidnapped. But we knew that before from an NGO who called us and told us that.
When Jim came back, what did he tell you about the kidnapping?
He didn't talk about it very much, to be honest. He went on a gratitude tour. He went around the country thanking a lot of friends, and he spent weeks doing that before he went back to work as an editor in Boston.
That's when he did the remarks at, was it Marquette, I think?
Yes.
That are used in the documentary.
Yes.
And I recommend watching, in addition to buying the book, watching the HBO documentary, Jim, the James Foley story. It was so well done.
Well, it was done by a friend of his, a childhood friend, who wanted people to know the person that Jim was.
And it does achieve that. And I'm so glad I watched it.
I learned from that film because I mean, Jim had been in captivity nearly 2 years.
Yeah.
So it was through the returned hostages. All the European hostages were negotiated out. It was the British and the Americans who were not.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in a second. I just want to say that it's so interesting to me, even though I'm a journalist and I understand it, that he came back from having been kidnapped and scaring his family deeply, of course. But then he turns around and he says, "I'm going back. I've got to go back." There had to have been debate in the family. Don't go, do go. We support you. We don't support you. What was that moment like when he told you all he was going to go
Well,
back?
Jim worked as an editor for many months and then started doing some work for Human Rights Watch, went back into Libya, actually, for a while that fall, and was home for Christmas. That was the last Christmas he was home. But after that, he was resolved he was going back, and this time wanted to go to Syria because not many journalists were there.
Oh, 'cause
and
it was
he
too
felt
dangerous.
exactly, and he felt strongly that the West, that we needed to know what was going on. So he was very committed to going. And you're right, some of his brothers and dearest friends were angry at him for even considering it. Yeah, it was tough. It's tough to have a child who's so passionate about something and feels so strongly that it's his calling, and yet as a parent to be deathly afraid, for their safety. It's tough.
And you can't cling to their pants leg.
No, and
they're
he's
grown
a grown man. He was our oldest. He was
Yeah.
already in his 30s, and he was passionate. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll be home for Christmas." And Jim had taken all the precautions that one could as a freelancer. He'd taken all the courses, had the safety equipment, was well connected, but was nevertheless alone,
But he met up with colleagues there.
He did, but he didn't go with colleagues.
With colleagues,
no.
yeah.
I'm very independent. But yes, often they would go in groups onto the front line or whatever. Yes.
Did you have any kind of plan where he called you once a week or texted you or emailed you once a week or
we didn't
any kind of check-in?
He did with his
Boss.
Various people. He
Yeah.
was freelance, so he had several
At
people.
the Global Post.
Agence Presse.
Presse, yeah.
Yes, and others. But with us, he just called often. Always on the weekend, always on holidays and birthdays, and he just was always in touch.
So you
so
were,
when he wasn't, it was very odd.
Of course.
Yeah.
And he was there. He was there how long before he got kidnapped?
Jim was in and out the entire
This was
year of 2012.
Right.
Yeah, so he'd been there in and out about 11 months.
So so basically
Almost a year. Almost
and you're
a year.
expecting him to come home for Thanksgiving.
Christmas.
Okay, Christmas. But it was at Thanksgiving
That when he was kidnapped.
that nobody heard from him.
Nobody heard. We didn't hear from him at all, and that was kind of a deafening void.
That was a loud quiet.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Exactly. I was concerned. We were very concerned. It was the morning after Thanksgiving, we received a phone call from one of his colleagues in Turkey telling us that he had been kidnapped and he did not meet at the checkpoint where they were supposed to meet.
And then it was sometime after that you got your first email from the kidnappers making you aware that it was for real. It was him. He had your worst fears were
A full
true.
year later. It was a full year
But you
later.
believed it to be true. I mean,
Which?
That he had been kidnapped. You did not doubt that. I mean, you assumed but did not know for sure he was alive, but you felt you were confident he'd been kidnapped.
We knew he had disappeared. That's
Yes,
all we knew.
that's all
we
you
didn't
knew.
know he was alive. We didn't know who had him for 9 months.
Until you got that email from...
No, it was actually through a Belgian gentleman who had gone to Syria to rescue his own son who had become a jihadist. He called and no one wanted to talk to him. I thought, I'll talk to anybody who knows what Jim is. And he said, my son has seen Jim, he's alive. And he was the one who told us. And then actually one of Kayla Mueller's colleagues also called and testified to having seen Jim. So we didn't get an email
How did that hit you?
till much later.
Was that just, well, I mean, to hear
hopeful.
that.
I was hopeful, incredibly hopeful that he was alive.
It has to be such a jumble of emotions, though, that you've got to manage, you know.
Yeah.
Did you ever think of, at hearing that, of just going over there and seeing what you could do, if you could get close?
I regret that I didn't, but I had a lot of pushback about that.
Yeah, and
but I do regret.
I'm sure, especially.
Well, I do regret that I hadn't, especially recently. I had a chance to speak to that Belgian gentleman. Sometimes I have a lot of regrets. I really failed Jim, in that I wish I had just done more. You know, I tried to do all I knew to do, but
Well, you were breaking out of a shell in a lot of ways too. You were shedding the skin of who you'd been, and becoming almost a warrior mother, and if not in fact a warrior mother. But I just the little bit I know about you from reading and meeting you, you strike me as somebody who would definitely have the stuff it takes to go over and do what you could to get as close to your son as you could. You know, to follow in the footsteps.
But I didn't.
You don't. Okay, that's,
anyway.
But don't doubt. I mean, I don't think you do doubt your bravery, but because you had so many forces telling you to not do that.
Right.
You know,
right. And to be honest, Carol, I was really at that point trusting our government. They kept telling me Jim is our highest priority. They told me that every single time I spoke to them. Diane, don't worry, he's our highest priority. And people were kind to me, and they, kept reassuring me. And our second FBI agent was pretty good, and much better than the first, who didn't know anything about what was going on. But he did go and interview that Belgian father and the jihadist, and I thought, okay, now we know Jim's alive, things are happening, so I trusted that.
And you felt they have more power than I do. It's better.
Expertise.
Yeah,
I mean, I didn't know anything.
Every day you're learning.
Yes.
Every day you're becoming smarter, and I'm sure you look back on it now,
hopefully,
and see it as like such a lightning pace of knowledge you kept acquiring as these.
I've learned a lot.
As often things were happening that disappointed you, you learned more from your disappointments than your wins in many ways.
Absolutely.
Because people were letting you down all over.
I learned a lot. I've learned a lot in 10 years.
Yes, you have. No, and it's remarkable. What was the family stability or structure at this time? Were you all holding together cohesively, or were there internal debates with the family as, you debated whether, because you had to make a decision to go public. That's a big decision to go public. And
well, to be honest, when Jim was taken, all of our kids were out of the home. They were all, several of them were married, living far away. I mean, we had 2 of them in the military. Well, 3 actually. Katie was still a Navy nurse at the time. So they weren't home. So it was John and I, together with some of Jim's dearest friends and our oldest son, Michael, who tended to huddle about this. But our government told us to be quiet and not talk to anybody. The best thing you can do is don't talk to anybody. We've got it. Jim's our highest priority. So we went through Christmas not telling anybody. I was about to explode because I just thought 6 weeks, and our FBI agent told us to ask President Assad for help. I mean, he had no idea what was going on, didn't know Arabic. I was really very concerned. So that's when we went public in that fall of 2013, because I wanted help from journalists, because I thought maybe journalists could help, because Jim had truly disappeared. he had vanished.
Yeah.
And no one knew where he was, let alone our government didn't know where he was.
Right. Well, you know you did the right thing.
Well, no, I don't actually, because what ended up happening is the media only increased Jim's value for the captors and really didn't move our government at all. So, in retrospect, it was not probably the right thing at all.
Well, let me ask you this. Were his fellow prisoners, because at this point, you know, there's something like 20 people altogether in this concrete bunker. In their countries, the ones who weren't American nationals, was there the same public face you were putting on Jim's?
Oh, capture? Yes, didn't
that increase their value?
Well, it was very different, though. As a matter of fact, I was jealous of what was going on, particularly in France, because I went, the European hostages started to come out in early 2014. And the Spanish were first, and then came the French, and then slowly they all came out. And my brother-in-law was living in, he was Spanish and was living in Europe, so he kindly accompanied me. We went to Spain to try to find out what's going on in other countries, how can we get Jim home, is Jim all right, those kinds of things. And I was in awe of how the media was insisting that the government bring their journalists home. And they were very public about it, pushed the government. They had, in Spain, they had, crowds, advocating France. They had banners on every government building, that kind of thing. But
that helped, don't you think?
It helped them, but because it moved their government to negotiate and get them out. But in our case,
did not move
but in the U.S., I was too ignorant about the U.S. policy against negotiations with terrorists. Right. So it did nothing to move our government. Our government had decided they were not going to engage, but it did increase the price in ISIS's eyes. Yeah. And that's where.
Well, your price is already high because you're an American.
Right.
Right. Now, when the various prisoners from other countries were released, did you try to meet with them?
I did, and they were wonderful.
You were getting updates on Jim.
And they were so generous. They all reached out. Every single one of them reached out to talk.
Did they tell you about the torture he was enduring?
Not at all, but they told us about. They were so sweet, very trying to protect me, telling me about all the good things.
Yeah, I know, but I just wondered if
they were very protective.
Because
they
you
didn't
did
tell
some
me
pretty
any
brave things down the road that, as it came to his, death, that I don't know that I could have done, but. So here you are in this quandary of the government telling you we're doing everything we can. They're telling you don't do anything, we're handling it. Yeah. And the pages are just ripping off the calendar.
Right.
People are getting released.
That's in 2014 they started to come home.
And you've been hearing from the captors, you're hearing from ISIS, they're demanding money. You can raise the money. But again, the government says, no, don't do that. You can't.
Well, not only that, our government told us, it was a really, they didn't tell us this until 2014. Previously they didn't. First of all, the captors only communicated with us for 1 month. So it was November to December of 2013. So that was, and then they stopped. And what they wanted to communicate was that they had Jim, they gave proof of questions, and they wanted money or exchange of prisoners, none of which we could do.
Right.
But in 2014, that's when, through David Bradley and other friends, we found out that Jim was not alone. He was also with 3 other Americans and 3 British. And that's when we got together with them in 2014. And that is when our government told us that our government would not do anything to help Jim. That they were not going to negotiate, not going to ask another country for help, and not going to do a rescue mission. And if we, as a family, tried to raise ransom, we would be prosecuted. And they told us that 3 times. It was kind of like, oh, I was appalled. But you know, the truth is that he was the only one telling us the truth, which was funny. After reflection, I realized that even though that sounded so callous, that government official was telling us the reality. And I wish I'd heard it. You know, I kind of thought, I thought that's terrible, you know? And so we started raising pledges ourselves for ransom. But ISIS didn't respond when I reached out to them, and until 2 weeks before they killed Jim.
And I think concurrently, attacks on Syria and ISIS were increasing.
Yes.
So there was an enormous amount of turmoil.
Yes.
And
Enormous.
The heat was going up, and the worst happens. You get a phone call from Laura Jakes that Jim has been killed, he's been beheaded. You do something that's so difficult for me to comprehend because I don't know that I could do it. I respect your doing it, but you watched the video of your son's execution.
Oh, no, I did not.
Oh, I thought you said you did.
Oh, no, I never would have done that.
Then I misread that.
No, I went onto Twitter to see the image.
So you looked at
the image only, certainly not the video.
But you looked at his dead.
Well, the only reason I did was I wanted to confirm it was Jim. I thought, what is this? I thought, is that Jim? And it looked like Jim. So, but I hoped, I'm an optimist. I thought, no, hopefully this is a cruel joke, photoshopped. This is just, they're trying to terrorize us with this.
And
image.
family members were looking at it too, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But did you watch the video?
No.
No, did you watch the video up to the point of before
No,
when he was making the statement?
The statement, yes.
Yeah, okay. So you knew that was Jim?
Yes,
Yeah.
I knew that was Jim. But the actual shot
Execution,
of him,
right.
yeah, I didn't watch that.
Right.
I would never watch that.
No.
But my hope was that it was
fake.
And so I reached out to everybody I knew, literally. I sent emails, our whole family did, to everyone. My sister was there and her husband and my husband and I particularly, but no one got back to us. I think our whole government was shocked. It was not, it was...
That's odd.
They were shocked. I think our administration had underestimated the hatred that was there. And how shrewd they were, that, all right, you don't pay for your people, well, we're going to use them then.
And then they beheaded another soon after that.
Well,
right?
that's the horror.
This was a succession of videos that were released of journalists and others in orange jumpsuits in the desert. And that guy, Jihadi John, I think everybody would remember the way that was becoming all too frequent occurrence.
It was horrific.
It was horrific, and you had to relive it and relive it and relive it with every other execution. You did a couple of things that I think are very interesting, and one that is just incredibly a great legacy. But first, the fact that you went and, they captured these guys who had, the authorities captured the guys who had held him hostage, this group called the Beatles. And they were an ISIS group that were called that because they took special joy in beating their captives viciously and killing them. And they were all arrested. The group that was responsible for Jim's death were brought to trial or plea deals. And in particular, one of them, Alexander Cody, who, while he was not, well, we don't, he wasn't the one who literally killed Jim, and you're not sure whether he was there at the site, but he was complicit in his murder. And part of his plea deal was to meet with you. And you did that.
Yeah.
You went and met with him.
Yeah.
In Virginia. I don't want to make light of it, but I thought it was interesting that you noted that the Johnny Depp trial was going on just down the road. And your trial was getting no attention, and the Johnny Depp trial was getting...
Yeah, that was kind of sobering to us because, first of all, we never expected that they would be apprehended. And it was 4 years after Jim's murder. And the Kurdish, it was thanks to some of the Kurdish soldiers who found them and realized that they were just assuming other names, but these were two of the Beatles, the jihadists, who had kidnapped and tortured Jim primarily. That was what they had done, and were complicit, certainly, in the murder and all of that. But it took a while for us to extradite them to the United States, and we had to work with the British and the American government. It was a huge undertaking by Scotland Yard and the FBI. It required enormous effort and really the best of our justice system to bring them finally to Alexandria for trial in 2022. So it was a big deal. I was, and the prosecuting team couldn't have been better. They were like the A team. We'd had the D team.
Things were changing.
Yeah, they were amazing. And all the hostages, European hostages, came and testified. They did such a brilliant job. But Cody Alexander just pleaded guilty to all 8 counts and offered to speak to victims, which was kind of interesting. I don't think his defense team did much for him. I don't know, the poor guy.
I think it's even more interesting that you're the only one who said, yes, I'll do that.
Well, I was the only one at first. Some of the other families may have eventually. But I wanted to talk to him because I knew Jim would have talked to him. And Jim would have wanted to hear his side of the story.
I think I would have taken a weapon and done him in. I don't know that I could have sat there.
Well, people, it's just, I just know Jim. And, but anyway, but when it got closer to the time, I was kind of daunted about it. I was a little nervous about it. My family wanted nothing to do with it. So that is when my friend, Colin McCann, chose to come with me. And so he was curious. Colin's a lot like Jim. Colin's a very good storyteller and good listener.
Great writer.
And a great writer. I didn't know how good a writer.
You had a hat trick. You had it all.
Well, I didn't know. That was a God instance, seriously, because I did not know Colin. But anyway, Colin said, "I'll go with you, Diane. Let's hear him out." He was all for it. So I did get to spend 3 days talking to Alexander. Which was quite amazing, really.
And that's why people should read the book to go into that, because I don't want to go into it in too much detail, because I do want to spend a good chunk of time talking about what you've done since, how you've taken this tragic, horrid situation and turned it into something that's not only a legacy for Jim, but has actually made a significant difference in how the American government deals with people who've been taken hostage and prisoners.
That's my hope.
The James Foley Foundation.
Right. Within 3 weeks, we started the James Foley.
And since your experience with the government, you had a complicated relationship with the Obama administration, where at the beginning you thought they were going to do right, then you felt betrayed, and then in the end they came around, and too late for Jim. But they came around. And talk about what policies were put into place after Jim's death.
Well, President Obama, I'm sure, felt it was the right thing to do for the country at the time. That was the slogan. It was for over several administrations, not just President Obama, that we do not negotiate with terrorists, because it makes sense that we do. They're going to take more Americans. The research actually showed that if you don't negotiate, they're going to die. But after everyone was killed, it was Jim, Stephen Sotloff, Peter Kassig, the 2 British citizens, and eventually Kayla and John Cantley. Obama and his administration realized, we got to look at this. So they did a study, and they actually, they set up the current U.S. hostage enterprise, which was an amazing work, and has made a difference. Since 2014, more than 100 U.S. nationals have come home. And I'm just so proud of that.
As you should be. Oh,
I didn't mean to do that. I really am, because to me that's the legacy of all those brave Americans who were abandoned.
Do you think that had that been in place, Jim would be alive today?
He would have had a chance. It's not a given. I mean, look at the current American hostages who are being held by Hamas. It is not a given. Whenever anyone's kidnapped by a terrorist group or by a nation state, like in Russia or China, it is very difficult to get them out. But at least they have a chance, because we have an envoy, a fusion cell, we have a new policy that says we're going to try, we're going to prioritize.
And do you feel this agency or unit, whatever it is, has credibility over in that part of the world? Do they get into the room with the people they need to get into to negotiate?
It's not always easy. It's a three-prong approach, if you will. Part of it's the special envoy for hostage affairs at the State Department. Part of it's at the FBI, kind of an interagency fusion cell. And the other part is at the White House, the National Security Council, where they bring the strategies from both those departments and then try to make decisions about negotiating. But you still have to negotiate with the captor, and that's can be a wild card.
Yeah.
So,
Every
however, with the Hamas hostages, I'm very proud of the way our government has worked with Qatar, Lebanon, and Egypt, and with trying to work with the Israeli government and find humanitarian channels. And some have come home.
Do you, what is your role? Do you meet with families? Do you have a seat at the table with the government? Are you called upon often to give guidance and advice, I would imagine?
We do a little of all of that. One of the hearts of what we do is every year we do a qualitative research with current and former hostages to find out how well the enterprise is working. Because the structure is brilliant, really, but as with any structure, there's always different things that may not be working quite right, or things the family needs. So every year we do that to kind of uncover things that need to be worked on.
Yeah.
And the good thing about that is it's enabled us to have a good relationship with those pieces of the government to work with them and give them feedback, and they've been so gracious about it. And we work with families who are struggling to get the help they need.
They need a lot.
And then we work with Congress to make members aware of the challenges.
You focus on journalists, but you've said we're all vulnerable. If we travel to certain regions, Americans are vulnerable targets. I wonder if the expertise your organization has, if it's been made available to tour groups, to hotels, to cruise lines, to to travel agencies that make it possible for people. I mean, I have friends who take holidays in parts of the world that aren't safe, you know. And is there any engagement you have with organizations like those to give them rules of the road?
Well, we did put out a traveler safety guide. Ellen would know. Was that 2 years ago, maybe, Ellen? But we primarily, there's just so much a small NGO can do, to be honest. But we do, we have an undergraduate and graduate curricula for aspiring journalists and freelance journalists. But that's why we did the International Travel Guide, because I do think Americans often do travel for pleasure, work, education, humanitarian work. Journalists, we have a lot of reasons for traveling, and we need to be less naive. We need to be very aware that we are targeted, and how we act abroad, how we engage with people, we need to be very aware of that. And the State Department's trying to do their part too. They have a website where they designate certain countries, there's a risk for kidnapping, and they'll put that.
Yeah, they've done that with Russia now.
Yes.
Is this your job now? Is this your career?
Unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately, it's been very healing for me in many ways.
Oh, of course.
But it has been a lot of work. It's been full-time work, full-time volunteer
keeps
work.
them alive a little bit, right?
It definitely does.
You know?
When we see people come home, there's just nothing like a family welcoming their loved one home.
And you can share in there.
Yeah. Or seeing an aspiring journalist who knows how to keep themselves as safe as possible and is more shrewd about how they go about what they do.
You never got his body.
No.
And you never were told where it might be or what happened to him.
No.
How did you memorialize or bury him, or in what form did some version of a funeral happen?
We had 2 funerals. I mean, there was such an outpouring. Jim was very loved. I had no idea how much, not only here domestically, but around the world. Jim was a very good person and acquired a lot of friends. So we ended up having a funeral quickly, and then realized so many people had wanted to come, we had another one.
Another one.
But what we do really to keep him alive is we have an annual run walk that's international and virtual to raise funds for our work and to promote safety for journalists and for our country, as Americans. And we also, here in Washington, do a Freedom Awards. This year, May 1st, is our Freedom Awards, nearly sold out this year, to bring families together with government officials and journalists who care about the issue.
And this is all through your website.
It is, and these are just ways to it's helped us build a community, first of all, of journalists like yourself and government people who care about the issue, and recognize that as a government, we need to have the moral courage to have the backs of our brave Americans who may be targeted simply because they have a blue passport, if you will. But we also have to work on deterrence. We can't be, we've got to, as Western nations, we have to work very hard on deterrence.
And you're doing that. Thank you so much, Diane. Be sure to get all the copies of the book. He must be so proud of you.
Well, I don't know. He has challenged me more than I've ever been challenged in my life.
Well, the oldest can do that sometimes.
Yes,
but,
yes.
You're a very brave woman, and the work you're doing is so important. And thank you for giving us some time today.
Well, thank you for listening. Thank you.
And good luck in May with your program. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you.